Now to a market alert. Stocks have cooled from their record runs this week, bolstered especially yesterday when the Fed assured investors that interest rates would remain low even as the economy recovers. But, and stop me if you've heard this line before, many people outside of Wall Street don't feel a recovery at all. I know how you feel. Wages are stagnant despite higher worker productivity. Income inequality keeps rising, okay, seeing a trend here, and raising the federal minimum wage stuck in Congress just like everything else. So some states are taking matters into their own hands. The Massachusetts House last night voted to raise the minimum wage to $11 an hour. Good for them. 9 other states have passed increases just this year. And then there's this, the city of Seattle, which went around the feds and their own state legislature to hike the hourly rate to over $15 within the next few years. Our next guest argues Seattle has the right idea that if all politics are taken local, then maybe kitchen table economics should be too. Richard Florida, not only a friend of the show, he's also a senior editor at The Atlantic. He's researched to the max the debate about minimum wage. Generally, we talk, Richard, about...
To the max.
To the max. Generally, we talk about the federal minimum wage as the way to get wages up for all workers at that low level. But you're saying that we should be more local in our approach.
Well, you know, we talk a lot about inequality in the United States. To me, the issue is not the top. That's where we tend to talk about. It's the bottom. It's this sinking bottom. We should stop talking about inequality and talk about building a middle class. That's what we did in the Depression. We turned crappy factory jobs into good middle class jobs. We have to do that again. How are we going to do that? Well, more than half of our workforce toils in low-wage, low-skill service jobs. There's a number of ways to boost them, but one way is to rethink the minimum wage. And what I'm arguing is we index a lot of things by cost of living. We should be thinking about indexing things like a minimum wage by where you live, by geography.
Richard, one thing that seems to be happening with states and different localities pursuing their own minimum wage hike is that you're sort of seeing this real definition of two Americas, where you have a coastal wage and a northeastern wage versus a southern wage, and there's a huge disparity. What does that mean for the future of the country if you have a whole block of people making a lot more in the coast or the north than you have people making in the south?
Well, I think that's where we're at. We not only have a split labor market, we have a split country because those clusters of knowledge and high tech on the East Coast, this East Coast corridor, and then the Bay Area and LA. And then we have that little energy belt, you know, in Texas and parts of Louisiana and then up in the Dakotas. But so much of the rest of the country is falling behind. You know, a place like Seattle needs a minimum wage of about $15 an hour. A place like Washington, D.C. probably needs a minimum wage of about $18 an hour. But a place like Orlando or Tampa or Miami or Las Vegas could get by with a minimum wage of 10 or 11 because the cost of living are so different in those places.
So, Richard, just to clarify, are you advocating for a federal minimum wage that is indexed to the cost of living in various cities? Or are you advocating for, like, what SeaTac did and taking matters into their own hands?
I think you could go either way. I think one way to think about it is if the federal government said that we would start geographically indexing public policy. I think it's something the United States has to consider. We've indexed stuff for cost of living. We should be, especially when we're rethinking minimum wage, we'd be thinking about geographically indexing that. Because $10 will get you so far in, you know, Miami or Las Vegas or Detroit and Pittsburgh. It ain't going to get you nearly as far in San Francisco or New York or Washington. But I think what's happening is that local polities and mayors are taking these matters into their own hands. And it's pressure. It's the kind of pressure Bill de Blasio felt and Bill de Blasio's constituency brought to bear here in New York. It's the kind of pressure that's building in places like Boston and D.C. and Seattle. So I do think that helps, you know, create this two Americas, which is quite, I think the two America trend is getting worse and worse, bigger and bigger, and it's extremely troubling.
The city that set off this local minimum wage trend before Seattle was this small city called SeaTac.
Yep. South
of Seattle. It's where the airport is located. They set their minimum wage at $15 an hour, and the thinking was, well, the airport's here. The businesses that are here need to be at the airport so they can't leave, so we can make them pay a higher wage. But lots of other cities, they don't have an airport like that, and so they have to worry if they raise their minimum wage, jobs might go somewhere else. How should cities think about that, and is that a reason to do this at the state level or the federal level?
Well, I just read some of the Bureau of Labor Statistics research and the better labor economists, and there's a wide debate on this. And the consensus seems to be if you set the minimum wage at about 50 to 60% of the local median, You're not going to harm the economy, and probably you're going to do a little bit of net good. If you make that sky high, you're obviously going to drive people up. But airports are really interesting. My wife worked before she started working with me at a company called HMS Host. They do a lot of setting up of airports, and airports have always paid people better. It's really interesting that the wages of service workers in airports have generally been higher than the prevailing local wage. So it makes sense to me that this debate over a higher local minimum would occur in an area that's really a local airport authority. And I think we might see more of that.
Richard Florida, thank you so much for being at the table with us today. It's great to have you actually here present.
It's great to be here, and congratulations, guys.
Thank you.